I'm continuing my series, Fabiano Caruana's Top 10 Attacks. Do check out the playlist, you'll find the link up there somewhere if you want to see recordings I've already done in this series. And don't think that I'm favouring Fabiano Caruana in the run-up to the World Championship match. There is, of course, Magnus Carlsen playlist with his top 10 finishes, and you'll find the link up there somewhere. So, on with this game. I'm going through in roughly chronological order. You'll find a couple of old videos in that playlist, but the new videos are in chronological order. And we are up to 2012. So Fabiano is 19 years old at this point. And this is a game that's played in the Swiss League in March 2012. Already in January, he had a superb Viconsay tournament where he scored 8 out of 13, and that was quite a breakthrough event for him. So it really seemed as though he was joining the top players in the world. And although you'll see his rating here is given as 2682, I think already on the live list he was over 2700. So, played in the Swiss League. His opponent is Vadim Milov, who was representing Switzerland, an Israeli grandmaster actually, and a very decent player. It's interesting that it's a French and also this Rubinstein variation that we looked at in the last game in this series actually. This time Fabiano plays a little bit differently. So in the game previously we looked at against Berg, Caruana played like this, and with bishop d3 and then c5 and so on. In this game he plays bishop g5, which is another of the main variations. h6 puts the question to the bishop, and white exchanges and now drops the bishop back to h4. So I mean there are other ways to play this, but this is one of the main lines. And now Black strikes out straight away with c5, and this variation has quite a reasonable reputation. Very important for Black to hit out at this centre, otherwise White just has central control and can build up and attack easily. And now Caruana plays bishop c4. The other main move here is bishop b5 check, but bishop c4 is one of the main moves. And White castles kingside and bishop e7. Now it's possible to simply recapture this pawn here, but queen e2 is actually a far more dangerous move because White brings the rook into the middle of the board. The queen is well stationed on e2, rooks are connected, and White is looking to recapture here. Black's problem is this bishop on c8. If this bishop can emerge successfully without too much hassle, then Black normally is okay in this position, but it's a little bit problematic. This is actually a pretty well-known position. Queen b6 is the best move. Now the pawn on b2 is threatened, and also Black is threatening simply to support the d pawn, so White best take this. And here the best move for Black is to take the pawn that's offered on b2. Now this leads to a very complicated position after knight f5. This is for those of you who are interested in the theory. And basically White in this variation is slightly better. Black should give up this pawn, or give back the pawn I should say. And well, White is slightly better in this position. I think that's all we can say. And that's a reasonable way for Black to play. But in this game, Milov played knight d5. Now what Black is doing is he wants to exchange pieces, and that will reduce the tension in the position. Of course, when you've got a slightly cramped position, you want to exchange pieces. But Caruana did not want to exchange here, and I think quite correctly played the bishop back to g3. So keeps keeps more tension in the position, there are more pieces. And now in this position, if queen takes pawn, then bishop takes knight, and white has won a piece because of the pin. So bishop f6 from Milov, attacking the knight on d4. c3 supports the knight, and also the queen protects the pawn on b2. Well, I think it's quite clear that white has better development than black. Pieces are, I think, fairly aggressively placed. This bishop is the problem. If you could just put the rooks in the middle and leave the bishop on c8, then black would be absolutely fine here. But first of all, we've got to get that bishop out. And now here's an interesting moment. I think if we look at the positives of black's position, it's those 4 kingside pawns which shut out white's pieces for the moment. So if black can develop, normally he's pretty solid, he's doing okay. But this is a nice move. The knight comes back to f3 and then into the beautiful e5 square. And we saw this in Caruana's game against Berg, which you'll find in the playlist as well. And that knight on e5, of course, is really menacing, looming over the ramparts here at these nice squares. And can sometimes even duck back to g4 as well. But this bishop has come out, so that's something of a success for black, and the rooks are connected, so the rook comes into the middle. Now this bishop isn't doing too much on c4, so it just nudges back to d3, and that, as we know, is a very important diagonal. And white is, already, I think, threatening queen e4 and potential mate here. So bishop comes back to e7. Now if queen e4, then that can be met by knight f6 and everything is covered. So king h1 from Caruana. So he's preparing to advance the f-pawn. At some moment anyway. And the knight drops back to f6. So unmasks the rook and the bishop as well. And so far black is pretty solid here. Pawn to f4, so things are building up nicely. And rook f e8. Now black has to be careful. You remember in that last game mentioned against Berg, where f7 was very sensitive. Here, the sacrifice certainly isn't working at the moment, but black always has to be a little bit careful. But the rook comes to e8. It's probably a decent move, actually, as preparation, as prophylaxis against f5, because that would open up the e-file and give black counterplay. So that's a decent move. So if you can't get in f5, what's white going to do next? Well, actually, Fabiano comes up with a very good idea. And that's bishop f2, attacking the queen. And when the queen goes back, bishop d4. Now this is a really nice little spin round with the bishop, because those two pieces and the knight still are really menacing. Black's king could be in some trouble here. But black is still solid, so bishop f8. Just improving the coordination of these pieces. The queen now defends f7. Again, f5 isn't really happening because of that rook here. So black for the time being is pretty solid. Here's an interesting moment. It's possible to exchange on c6 and take on f6. Let's have a very quick look at that. And I'm sure this would have been very tempting indeed, damaging black's kingside pawn structure. But if white doesn't succeed with the attack, then the opposite colour bishops could give black drawing chances. So let's go back here. So Caruana resisted that, and well, he played another excellent move, and that's queen to e3. So as well as setting up a threat here, queen is perhaps looking to come over to the king side onto one of these squares. And this is a tricky moment in the game. Black didn't play the natural move b6. I think probably because white would grab the bishop and then come back with the queen. That's a very tricky move, so that these light squares are controlled and that rook is perhaps in a little bit of trouble. I mean, black can survive this, but I can understand why he didn't want to go in for that. Instead, he played knight d5, attacking the queen. But now the queen switches over and black is in big trouble now. Sometimes there's a simple idea of playing knight g4 and just being able to capture on h6 because of these pins. And that's very nasty. Or if king h8 here, then f5 is now very strong. f7 is in trouble. Big trouble here. You can see that's attacked, and rook takes f7 and queen g6, and thank you very much. Whoops, queen comes in here. So coming back to this position, remember the queen has just shifted over to g3. So Milov plays pawn to f5, which shuts out this bishop on d3. Only problem is that now this knight is just beautifully situated on e5, then can never really be driven away. And here is a very interesting moment in the game where Caruana plays a steady move, an excellent move, a really beautiful move. He resists going for an attack with queen g6. And the idea of this is, okay, let me make a random move for black. Let's say a6. The idea is knight g4. Obviously now threats to take on h6. And after this, the queen comes in, the king is driven away, and, well, white is going to open up the position with f5, and black's king is in huge trouble in that position. I have no doubt that he would have been looking at the very obvious attacking try queen g6 and knight g4 as well, but perhaps he couldn't quite see a clear way through. He doesn't speculate. I think this is important to note. Fabiano plays some beautiful attacks sometimes, but rarely speculates. Now and again, but only if he has to. Instead of that, he played pawn to c4, and this is also very, very strong and a very, very clever idea. So the knight can't go back to its natural square e4 to come in here because of the exchange on c6, and then simply bishop takes f6 wins a piece. So the knight had to go back to a poor square b6. So you can see it's rather out of play there. And now a brilliant move, bishop e2. This was his idea. Very quiet, but deadly. So the rook protects the bishop. That's the first thing to note. So no rook takes bishop. But this bishop is bouncing around to h5, and this is a really painful diagonal. Bishop e4 from Milov. Bishop h5, attacking the rook. And now rook e7, the only move. This rook is very unfortunately placed. You can see it has no decent move in this position because these squares are covered by, well, the bishop and the knight. And these rooks are now split. And that is an unfortunate situation for black. Because what Caruana does now is simply organize an attack down the d file. And white has two rooks playing against one rook. And black can't defend against that. So first of all, b3 to make sure that nothing is happening on c4. This knight is very poorly placed, so it drops back. Bishop c3, excellent move. Perhaps looking to play bishop b4 to trap that rook, but also opening up the d file. Knight d6 played, which blocks and rook d4. So what he's doing is he's simply going to double here, and that leaves the rook on d8 very precariously placed in a pin. So it's simple mathematics. 2 rooks are much stronger than 1 rook. This rook on e7 is completely out of play. It's fascinating. Milov prepares a little trick, but this rebounds on him. Bishop came back, and now rook d1, just setting up the pin. Milov prepared knight e4, attacking the queen. But Caruana simply gives up the queen. So Caruana has rook and a knight against black's queen. But black is utterly helpless here. There is no defense to the attack on the 8th rank because this rook can do precisely nothing here. Perhaps some of you were expecting a big crunching attack on the king side, a little bit like the game I showed you against Emmanuel Berg in the previous video in this series. This is a more subtle attack along the 8th rank, and I think prepared beautifully by Fabiano. Okay, the game finished queen b6. The rook slid along the 8th rank, preparing for rook number 2 to enter the game. Queen f2, I mean, this is quite forlorn. And after knight takes bishop, preventing queen g2 mate, black resigned. Let's just have a look why. Because after pawn takes, well, we could just play rook d8, but we can be a bit flashy as well. If king takes, then that will be mate. Next move, we may as well just show it. Thank you very much. And if black wants to avoid that with king h7, then rook number 2 does come down and mate will follow shortly. I just thought that was a beautifully controlled attack from Caruana. The way, just a very quick recap, the way that this bishop here was brought round to d4 here. Very nicely placed, and these bishops, this duo, absolutely superb. And then here, this moment when he prepared this bishop maneuver round to h5, and yeah, there is simply no defense to the invasion when the rook is on e7. Fantastic stuff. So, if you'd like to see more of the games in the Caruana top 10 attacks, then do check out the playlist above there. And indeed, if you want to check out his entire playlist of his games with videos on this channel, then there's a link up there as well. And for Magnus too. More of these coming soon. Hope you enjoyed it.